podcast.
Now close your eyes. It's 3 a.m. in the Texas Hill Country. 1885. The air is so thick with dust, you can taste the iron in the soil. And you're sitting on a fence line, watching this shadow move among the cattle. But it's not a shadow. It's not a ghost. It's a man. He just moves like one. He's this man that spent more time talking to horses than to people. Born into a world where his skin color meant he was less than, but his hands proved he was more than. And tonight on Bobcat Cherry, we aren't just skimming the surface. We're going deep into the dirt, the blood, and the bone of the man who redefined the American West. This is a chronicle of Bill Pickett, the Bulldogger, a man who didn't just survive the frontier, he wrestled it to its knees. To understand Bill, you have to understand the post-Civil War Texas landscape. This wasn't the refined Texas of big oil and giant skyscrapers. This was the freaking brush country, and it was rough. Williamson County back then was a maze of mesquite and prickly pear. Not my favorite. Bill was born in 1870. Think about that date. The echoes of the Civil War were still screaming in the background at this time. His father, Thomas, was a man of immense strength who had survived slavery and was now trying to carve a life out on this beautiful land, and no one wanted to give him an inch. Bill, however, was the second of 13 kiddos. In a family that size, you have to learn to do things very quickly, and two in particular. You have to learn how to work, and you have to learn how to be useful. By age 10, Bill wasn't playing with toys, watching TV, gaming it up. He was breaking in colts. Now, breaking in colts isn't what it looks like on TV. It wasn't horse whispering, and in 1880 it was violent, dusty, and dangerous dance of wills between the two. This is where Bill learned the psychology of animals, and he realized an animal doesn't care about your pedigree. It cares about your balance, your scent, and your courage. And if you flinched, you're done. Bill Pickett never flinched. Let's talk about the eureka moment. Every legend seems to have one. For Bill, it was a stray steer and a cow dog. On a hot afternoon, Bill watched a bulldog, small, squat, muscular dog, corner a steer that was easily 10 times its weight. The steer lowered its head to gore the dog, but the dog was so much faster. It leaped up and sank its teeth into the steer's nose and upper lip. Now, let's get technical here. The upper lip of a bovine is full of nerve endings. So is ours. When you apply pressure to theirs, it sends a signal to the brain that mimics a kill grip from a predator, like a wolf or a mountain lion. The steer's nervous system basically shuts down. Bill watched this and realized that if a 30-pound dog could do it, well, a 160-pound man could also do it too. He spent months practicing in secret. He'd ride his horse, Spradley, a horse that was almost an extension of his own body, and he would leap. Imagine the core strength required to dive off a galloping horse, grab a 1,000-pound animal, moving with horns and twist. He failed thousands of times. He probably even broke his ribs. We don't know for sure. But when he finally perfected the bite, he had changed the trajectory of Western history. By the 1890s, Bill was too good to just stay in Taylor, Texas. But the world really wasn't ready for him either. This is the edgy part of the story. Bill would show up at white-only rodeos, and for the most part, wasn't really allowed to enter. He'd set up in the dusty road outside the arena, and he'd charge 5 cents a look. Soon the crowd inside would hear the roar from the street and realize that the real show was happening in the dirt outside. He was the true performer. Then came the Miller Brothers and the 101 Ranch. This was the biggest show on earth, bigger than Buffalo Bill's. They saw Bill and realized he was a special attraction. But they also knew the politics of it all. They often marketed Bill as this dusky demon, or even tried to claim he was South American descent to bypass the Jim Crow laws of the time. And of course, Bill played that game. He wore the stupid costumes. He did what he had to do to get into that arena. Because once he was in that dirt, he was the freaking king. Soon, he became close friends with a guy named Will Rogers. Now imagine these two sitting by a fire. Rogers, this wisecracking philosopher, and Pickett, the silent man of iron. They shared a mutual respect that transcended the ugly, horrible racial lines of the era. Mexico City in 1908 at the El Toro Arena. This wasn't a normal rodeo. It was practically a blood sport. Bill made a bet with a local promoter that he could wrestle a fighting bull for 7 minutes straight. The crowd saw this as an insult to their culture. The bull was Chiquito. He was literally bred to kill. When Bill dropped from his horse and grabbed Chiquito's horns, the arena exploded. But not with cheers, with rage. And for those 7 minutes, Bill was a human shield. He was being gored in the legs, his ribs, everything looked awful. He was under the bull's weight, and the crowd was raining down heavy beer bottles and stones. His partner, Will Rogers, eventually had to ride in on a horse to rope the bull and pull it off of Bill because the crowd would not stop. Bill stood up, covered in blood, his face a mask of dust and sweat. He won that bet, and he survived the bull plus the mob. That is the real definition of grit. Bill died in 1932. He was 61 years old. He wasn't sitting in a rocking chair. He was working a bronco on the 101 Ranch. A kick to the head ended the life of the man who couldn't be broken by a bull. Bill Pickett was buried on the 101 Ranch, but his spirit is in every stadium light across this country. He was a man who took the no he was given and bit it until it turned into a yes. I'm Zach Hansen, and this is Bobcat Cherry. Bill Pickett didn't just ride for the brand. He was the brand. He reminds us that greatness isn't something you're given. It's something you wrestle out of the dirt with your bare hands. While Bill was out there wrestling 1,000-pound beasts in the dirt, there was another kind of war being fought in the small towns. A war not against animals, but against the very collapse of civilization itself. You see, strength isn't always about who can throw the biggest punch or jump the highest horse. Sometimes, the greatest show of grit in the Lone Star State is the person who stands perfectly still while the world around them is screaming in absolute panic. We're moving a bit east now from the dusty arenas of the 101 Ranch to the quiet limestone hallways of the Coleman County Jail. It's 1918. The men are at war. A plague is also at the door, and the law has just lost its leader. People expected a gunman to step out of the shadows to save them. And instead, they got a mother of 5 with a level gaze and a star pinned to her Sunday dress. We've seen the men who bit the bull. Now, let's meet the woman who tamed the county. Let's talk about the Iron Star herself, Emma Banister. You know, most people think the Old West died in 1900. And well, they're just wrong. And in 1918, the Texas frontier was still very much alive. It was trading its horses for horsepower. And that year, the world broke. Between the trenches of the Great War and the invisible killer, the Spanish flu, society was fraying at the edges. I'm Zach Hansen, and this is Bobcat Cherry. We're headed into Coleman, Texas. We're going to talk about a woman who didn't ask for power, but when the men in charge folded, she stepped up and picked up the star. Emma Banister wasn't just the first female sheriff in Texas. She was a master of the quiet war. This is a deep dive into how one woman used a law book and a level head to keep a county from falling to the abyss. To find Emma, we have to go back to 1871, to a family of pioneers. She grew up in Texas that was still being mapped. In 1894, she married a man named John Banister. Now, John wasn't just a lawman. He was a Company C Texas Ranger. He was the man the state sent when the situation was already a disaster. For 20 years, Emma lived the life of a ranger's wife. That meant months of silence while your husband hunted outlaws in the Big Bend. It also meant raising children in a home where a loaded Winchester was more of a husband and as common as a coffee pot. When John was elected sheriff of Coleman County in 1914, they moved into the top floor of the county jail. Emma wasn't just a homemaker, and according to county records, she acted as the de facto office manager at the time. She processed the prisoners, she managed the budget, and most importantly, she studied the criminals. While John was out on the road, Emma was the face of the law to every single thief and brawler locked in those cells. She learned that a calm voice usually does more work than a heavy club. Again, 1918. This was the year of the scythe, the Spanish flu, killing 500 million people worldwide. In Texas, whole towns were being quarantined. In the middle of this, John Banister, the rock of the county, suffered a stroke and died. The county commissioners were in an all-out panic, and prohibition was about to become the law of the land. And the liquor interest in Central Texas, well, was getting a bit violent. They needed a sheriff who could handle the paperwork of a world war, the logistics of a pandemic, and the violence of the bootleggers. They looked at Emma, and on August 1st, 1918, they did something unprecedented. They appointed her high sheriff. They didn't do it out of equality, they did it out of necessity. And Emma knew every case file, every warrant, and every snitch in the county. She was the most qualified man for the job. Emma didn't wear a costume. She didn't try to act like a gunfighter. She wore her Sunday best, pinned star to her dress, and went to work. Nothing fancy. Her term was defined by the draft dodgers. World War I was at its peak, and men were fleeing into the Texas brush to avoid the front lines. Emma had to coordinate with the federal agents to track these men down. She used her knowledge of the local families, knowing who was hiding his son in the barn and who was just scared. She also had to handle the flu. She turned the jail's resources toward public health. ensuring that prisoners didn't become a breeding ground for the disease. She ran the county with a fiscal discipline that the men before her couldn't match. She proved that law isn't just about the showdown, it's about the system. If the system works, the town will survive. Emma's success sent ripples through Texas politics. 6 years later, in 1924, we see the rise of Miriam Ma Ferguson. Texas was being choked by the Ku Klux Klan. They held the courts, and they certainly held the police. Ma Ferguson ran for governor on an anti-mask platform. She won, and like Emma, she used her position to dismantle a violent system. She pardoned thousands of people to fix a broken justice system and passed laws that stripped the KKK of their power in Texas. Emma proved a woman could handle the star. Ma proved a woman could handle the state. Together, they represent a period in Texas history where the traditional power structures failed and the unsung heroes had to step in to save the day. When her term ended, Emma didn't run for re-election. She simply handed the keys to the next man, went back to her farm, and lived a quiet life until 1956. She didn't do it for the glory. She did it because her county was in trouble and she was the only one who knew how to help. Emma Banister reminds us that true grit doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits behind a desk, looks at the chaos, and says, "Not on my watch." I'm Zach Hansen, and this is Bobcat Cherry. Join us next time as we dig into the dirt to find the heart of the Lone Star State. Stay gritty, Texas.